Right, good afternoon everybody and welcome to today's meeting of Customer and Corporate Services Scrutiny Management Committee calling-in meeting. This is the first of our two call-ins that we'll be hearing today, so we'll all be getting very friendly with each other, I'm sure. Just a very quick bit of housekeeping. If you could just make sure your mobile phones are either turned off or on silent. We're not anticipating a fire alarm, and I think everybody in the room knows where the toilets are, with the possible exception of a couple of observers. So if you do need to nip to the loo, just behind us there, you don't need to wait for us to stop or anything. You're welcome just to come in and out. In terms of apologies and substitutions, there's quite a hefty list today, so I will just go through them and hope that everybody's keeping up. So I have received apologies from Councillor Musson, who is being substituted by Councillor Kilbane, Councillor Norman, who is being substituted by Councillor Looker, Councillor Orrell, who is being substituted by Councillor Hook, Councillor Pearson, who is being substituted by Councillor Wan, and Councillor Rowley is being substituted in theory by Councillor Dave Taylor. Councillor Taylor is not currently present, so he may or may not be joining the meeting. We're hoping that he will be joining us. I will just acknowledge on that one as well that we did have a discussion, Councillor Rowley and myself, about whether or not this was an appropriate substitution, and we felt that given that it doesn't affect proportionality and given the precedent that's been set, then that would be acceptable. And Councillor Hollier is not present but doesn't have a substitute. On to the main agenda items of business then. Item 1 is declarations of interest. So does anybody have a declaration? Councillor Wan.
It's in my register of interest, but I work for the University of York. So just to put that on the record.
Thank you very much. And anybody else? No, can't see anybody else. On to agenda item 2, which is public participation, but we haven't had anybody registered to speak at this meeting today. So I will move us on to agenda item 3, which is the minutes from the last calling-in meeting, which was held on the 7th of February of this year. And if anybody has any comments or is happy for me to sign those as an accurate record, I can just see some nods. Yeah. Great, I will get those signed when they are. There's just one comment from me, which is that my initial is J, not C, but that's all right. So on to agenda item 4, which is the main item of business today. We are hearing a call-in. We're still operating under the constitution, which is in place until annual council later this month. So the way that the meeting will take place is that, first of all, I'll invite the calling-in members to come and address the committee, and they will then be there to answer any questions. There are 2 members wishing to address the committee, so they'll each have 3 minutes to address. We'll then ask questions. We'll then invite the executive member to come and make any case that he wishes to make, and given that there's 2 people speaking in the first section, I will allow Councillor to go on a little bit more than the 3 minutes, just to sort of even it up if that's what's required, and then there'll be the opportunity to ask questions. We have James Gilchrist as Director of Transport and Environment and Planning, and Dave Atkinson is Head of Highways and Transport, sitting on my left. They will be listening to the questions and the answers that are given, noting down any technical questions, and then once the executive member has left the table, I'll then invite them to address any questions, and then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask them any further questions. We then have an opportunity for a bit of discussion, and then we come to decide whether or not we feel that there's any recommendations which we wish to make to executive, or whether or not we feel that the decision that's reached is to be upheld as it is. So with that in mind, I will invite Councillor Waters and Councillor Rowley to come to the table. And if you each want to, well, you can choose between yourself who goes first and who goes second, but if you'd each like to address the committee, if I feel that you're going on beyond your 3 minutes, I might just give you an indication, but otherwise over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I do want members who have read this agenda and the response to the petition to solve a problem that the executive member and highways officers have expressly created will agree with me that the petition has not been responded to with any degree of sincerity or professionalism by those involved. The recommended action the executive member approved is simply a joke or an insult, depending on your viewpoint. If educating students and staff of the university or Archie School worked, then there wouldn't have been a problem on Badger Hill in the first place for the executive member to malevolently decide to dump in another ward. Despite taking over 4 months to respond to the petition, it appears that none of the solutions obvious to anyone with a degree of common sense were ever explored by officers or the executive member. Those were a Section 73 application to vary the travel planning conditions to increase the levels of car parking on the York University campus and the accessibility of existing parking. Did officers ever investigate this with the university? And if not, why not? Was it because of the executive member's closed mind on such a subject? Utilisation of spare park and ride capacity combined with a shuttle bus onto the campus, or indeed use of tier scooters. Was that ever considered? And of course, until the university take responsibility for their displaced parking, there remains the option for this councillor's local planning authority to refuse any further planning applications by the university that will lead to displaced highway parking problems. A recent precedent for such action having been set by planning officers refusing 21/02410/FUL on the 9th of February. The proposal not providing an appropriate level of on-site car parking. I'll leave members to look that one up. The contrast between that refusal and this situation being very stark. Myself and the people I represent do not accept the executive member's dismissal of this petition, which I would argue, based on his reply to me last year, is because of his bizarre desire to see parking chaos as a climate change contribution. His refusal to even consider solutions to this problem after he expressly dumped the problem into another ward is, in my opinion, non-feasance in public office, made worse by his decision on the 19th of April. I do hope members this afternoon see that such a non-response to a petition will lead to the undermining of the whole City of York Council petition system, if not countered today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters. I'm just going to note that Councillor Taylor has now arrived, so no problems. Don't think you've missed much other than Councillor Waters' initial opening remarks. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. We are elected by the members that live within our ward, and we have a responsibility to those residents that live within our ward. And what drives our decisions and what drives our policy should always be the residents that we represent, irrespective of their colour, creed, party, whatever it may be. It is very clear that since the introduction of the residents parking scheme in Badger Hill, which I absolutely accept that the Labour members for Hull Road consulted widely with Badger Hill, and that was a response to the residents' request. I fully accept that as a democratic decision. The result of that is that the parking has been displaced into our ward, and we have consulted widely with our residents in our ward. On Bank Holiday Monday, I was knocking on doors in Tranby Avenue when I could have been having a barbecue in the garden with my kids. And I was speaking to residents because I knew that would be the time to find them in. And overwhelmingly of the 70 houses that I spoke to and 70 residents that I spoke to on Tranby Avenue, of the 70 residents, every one of them was A, affected by the displaced parking, and B, wanted to see a resolution, and were behind the petition that we put forward to the executive member for transport. Of those 70 houses, only 4 of those houses would have backed a residence parking scheme. So a residence parking scheme is not the answer for Tranby Avenue. They recognise the installation of double yellow lines some way to resolving the issue, but all that's going to do is push that car parking displacement further down Tranby Avenue. The petition, which is really important because it came from our residents, the petition asked for a solution to be looked at and a solution to be found, and to simply dismiss this, and I respect the officers that have put the report together, to simply dismiss the opportunity to look at a full, wide-ranging report that looks at every option, I believe has been dismissed. And I would ask the committee to request that the executive member for transport revisit this and have a fuller and wider consultation in terms of a solution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I will just hand it over to members if you have any questions that you want to ask of either of the two members presenting the call-in. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if you could say a bit more about the impact of the displaced parking. Is it a question of volume of cars parked on the residential streets? Is it the sort of dangerous or inconsiderate nature of some of the parking? I just wonder if you could say a bit more about the impact that led to the petition, please.
Okay, thank you. If I might just answer that. Thank you, Councillor Benton. So imagine a situation where you live on a street where you feel that you can park your car in your drive and you can drive your car out of your drive, left or right, without any cars being impeded, without any worry or without any issues. That's what most of us have in our homes, and that's what most of us take for granted, that we can do that. Occasionally, you may find somebody parks opposite you and you just negotiate around them. Okay, I live in Broughton Way, and where I live, I have exactly the same. I drive out of my drive, I can go left and right. There is a school on the other side of where I live. There are certain times of the day that I know it's going to be difficult to get in and out of my drive, and I accept that because it's school pickup and school drop off. All right, the residents of Tranby Avenue, and I am more than happy to invite any one of you to come and speak to any of our residents, because this is residents led, it's not political. And there's myself and Councillor Waters, who are of different political persuasions, we are here for our residents. There are residents in our ward, and on Tranby Avenue particularly, can't get out of their drive. And it's not just at particular times of the day. This is because students, essentially students, and staff that work at the university, and we know this for a fact because we've questioned them and we've challenged them as ward councillors. We've been very proactive, are parking in ways that make it difficult or impossible for cars to get out of their drive. There are cars that are parked perfectly normally and perfectly respectfully, but there are cars that are parked there that are parked dangerously. There are cars that are parked there without any thought for anybody else, as if it's the divine right for them to have that. There are cars that are parked with their wheels up on the verges, and that's something that we all face in every one of our wards. But it's particularly a difficulty in Tranby Avenue. We have one resident who has a lamppost outside of her house, so she can't go left out of her drive, she has to go right, and by cars being inconsiderately parked, she's not able to do that. Now, we accept that there will be certain times of the day when cars will be inconsiderately parked. This isn't just a particular time of the day, this is all day. There are some cars that are parked there and are left there all week. And they've had cars that have had notices put on them, the requests that have been put on them, and those same cars are still there 3 or 4 days later, in some cases several weeks later. We have called the police to come, and where the cars have been parked inconsiderately and illegally in some respects, the police have taken action. But there needs to be a solution. Double yellows is not the solution. Res parking is not the solution. But I would request that you go back to the executive member and ask them to have a full roots and branch look at how to resolve this.
There isn't much more to add to that, but when it's mentioned in here about almost supposition, residents saying that it's university related parking, I do know there's quite a number of residents have actually challenged some of these people. There's one car in particular that was actually fined for parking at Badger Hill and is now permanently dumped on Tranby Avenue. There was another student was challenged who was actually in his first year on the university campus, not allowed to park on there. He dumped his car in Cavendish Grove and the brakes had locked. So he was spinning it round on the verge to try and get it moving. And we know where the parking's coming from. We don't need to be told that we're virtually inventing this, as it's mentioned in there that about the displaced parking from Archie's school. I'm just amazed that none of the officers actually went out at school arrival and leaving time to confirm what we were saying. They were virtually saying it's supposition in here, which is appalling. As Councillor Rowley said, double yellow lines aren't the answer. All they ever do is move a problem. Residents' parking schemes will not work in Osberwick. They are not wanted for the simple reason that it's on the number 6 bus route, the terminus of which is at the university, which means that university-related parking can be dumped anywhere throughout Osberwick. Are you simply going to chase it round with residents' parking schemes? A solution should have been sought 10 years ago. You're now at a Waterloo moment where you're going to have to look at a solution to this. We're probably talking at the moment, maximum 30 cars causing this chaos that could easily be accommodated on the university campus. But long term, the solution is to look at what was first mentioned with the university planning, a shuttle bus from the park and ride, or again, tier scooters. But simply dismissing this is not acceptable.
Okay, I think Councillor Baker was first. Councillor Wan, were you indicating, or was it?
I'll indicate later.
Okay, and Councillor Kilbane, is that an indication as well? I'm just making a list of who's wanting to ask, but Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Just to find out your evidence-based views on how you feel the university car parks are being used. And you said, you know, obviously it sounds like you feel that there's 30 cars, they could be accommodated easily on campus. And you've said the wording in your petition, which is on page 21, stated to your residents that you, from your view, the university car parks were currently virtually empty. And that's quite different to on page 24, what the occupancy rates were found to be. So where is your evidence for them being virtually empty?
The evidence is from one of the residents on Tranby Avenue who frequently walks up there and takes photographs of the empty car parks. So they say a photo tells 1,000 words. Well, I have no reason to disprove. I don't know how he takes photographs of supposedly 3/4 full car parks and makes the cars disappear.
Okay, thanks.
And again, if I might just add to that. So it's very easy to kind of throw around stats and say this is the case, that is the case. So myself and a number of residents from Tranby Avenue have, over a period of 2 weeks, visited on a daily basis the car parks in the university at Heslington. And what we had noticed was that there are times when occupancy, you know, is probably as low as 40%. But we've also noticed that there are certain times, in particular around graduation, and if you're aware that last week was graduation, and there are other times when the university has open days, and people will come and park in the university car parks because it's an open day or because it's a graduation. And with the greatest respect to the officers, it may well be that when they visited the car parks, it may well have been that it was a university open day. There were many of them. It may well, probably not likely to be in a graduation, but there could have been an event that meant that those car parks were. What I can say is from our evidence, and I'm more than happy to, I would need to speak to the resident before I can name him, but you know, we can say that over a period of 2 weeks, it was the average occupancy was about 60% on the main car parks in the Heslington site. Thank you.
Thanks. I think if when we come to getting the input from the officers, if you could just be thinking about anything that you can tell us about how those occupancy rates were achieved, you know, were arrived at, and when they were arrived at, and that sort of thing. I think that'll be very helpful. Sorry, Councillor Wan, did you want a question? Yeah, in you go. On you go.
Thank you. There were two things that Councillor Waters referred to that I didn't really understand. One was about a Section 73 order. I wonder if you could say what that is. And the other one was about a planning application. And I didn't get the number, so I haven't looked it up. What did it refer to?
Do you want me to repeat the number? Because I honestly think it would be well worth everybody having a look at this refusal notice. It was in relation to a leisure use of a current light industrial building on Clifton Moor. The application is 21/02 410/FUL. And it's very, very interesting. If you want to have a quick look at that before you make your decisions on that. Your other question was in relation to a Section 73 application. Well, everybody seems to try to say that the university's travel plan and its Section 106 agreement in relation to travel matters is set in stone and can't be challenged. Of course it can be challenged. If there was a will of this council and a will amongst the officers to actually approach the university and say, look, this isn't working, it's apparent it's not working, will you look at submitting a Section 73 application to vary the terms of the travel plan with the support of the council? We might actually get somewhere. At the moment, the university parking is capped at 1,500 spaces. If it was increased to 1,550 or 1,600, we might actually get somewhere.
Okay, next I've got Councillor Kilbane.
No, thanks, Chair, and thanks both. Just a couple of quick questions from me. Looking at the site, most of the residents seem to have drives. So can you explain the reason for the resistance to res park, given that most people can actually park on their drives and wouldn't have to pay it? And it would solve the problem of people parking on the streets that weren't known to the area. And also, are you calling for the Badger Hill res park to be rescinded?
So thank you, Councillor Kilbane. If I can answer your second question first, because that's a really important question. We are not asking for the residents' parking scheme in Badger Hill to be rescinded. All right, we weren't consulted as ward councillors in an adjoining ward about that scheme, but that's another matter. We absolutely respect the residents and the Labour councillors that represent them in Badger Hill. We absolutely respect that, and as far as we're concerned, that's a decision that has been taken, and we completely uphold that. So the issue for us is the fact that it's moved the problem into our ward. In answer to your first question, you're absolutely right. A lot of these houses do have drives for one car. These are family homes, and I live in a family home, and we have within our household we have 3 cars. Now I know that might be draw some aghast from our green colleagues. The reality is that we live in a ward that's not easily serviced, and we have cars on our drive. So our drives are full of cars that are ours. The fact that these are family homes, families have visitors. And so whilst it may not impact the residents who can move their cars onto their drives, I may ask you, Councillor Kilbane, how often do you have family and friends that come to visit you? And I would ask the same of all the members around the table. So the impact isn't necessarily on the residents of a res parking scheme. It is the fact that they would have to pay for their family, their friends to come and to visit them. And we have done extensive research with residents, and I can assure you, as a representative for Oswaldwick, if the residents that I spoke to, if the overwhelming number of those residents wanted a res parking scheme, then this is where myself and Councillor Waters would probably disagree. Because if the majority of residents wanted it, then I would lobby for it. The fact is that they don't, for those reasons.
Just to refer to the Badger Hill scheme, I do think when Badger Hill residents are actually faced with charges in relation to this, there might be a different result as to support for it. But as I've explained, when it comes to Oswaldwick and a residents parking scheme, you'd have to cover the whole area, and it would cause immense problems. Immense problems. There's no justification for it. This needs a solution based on the university campus, not simply moving the problems up and down the highway, creating problems for residents, and then in effect charging them for these problems. It didn't exist before this. It's been expressly created, and it requires a solution.
Okay, Councillor Looker.
Thank you. I'm following, I think, very closely on Councillor Kilbane's question. We probably, as often, our minds worked along parallel lines. I think when you look at parking, and I represent a ward which probably has one of the highest amounts of residence parking in the city, partly because at the end of the day, residents get so fed up with what is happening in Tranby Avenue that they vote to find a different solution. Now, it seems to me there are two solutions to attacking parking. One is the stick and one is the carrot. The stick would probably be a res park zone because that actually prohibits, fines, prevents people using the street as a parking area. The stick, the carrot, I think, is slightly more difficult. I'm not quite sure how you can, if the car parks are empty at this moment, which you're saying, would increasing the size of the car parks mean that people took up the space more readily? I'm not so sure. I don't know quite why increasing the size of the car park would mean people took up the car parking space in the university car park when they're not at the moment. They're not being thrown out of the car parks at the university, you're saying, because they are full. They are just choosing, and at the moment they have a free choice to park in Tranby Avenue. So I'm not quite sure whether your carrot is sufficiently strong to persuade people to vote to park differently.
In terms of that approach, the reason the suggestion was made as to increasing parking capacity at the university was to counter the point made by the officers, erroneously in my opinion, that the car parks are full. But in terms of why people choose to park some distance away from university car parks is because it's free. They are charged at the university. If they're working there, it's a proportion of the salary. It's a purely economic argument. And we've actually said in all this to increase the accessibility of the university car parks. People are actively discouraged from parking there. This parking chaos on the streets is completely unnecessary.
So just within that, and Councillor Rowley, just come in a minute, is your contention that you would seek to renegotiate with the university around the Section 73 and that sort of thing, because as a council we can't necessarily tell the university to reduce their parking fees or to waive them entirely, but is your contention that you would do that through that Section 73?
Those options should have been investigated. They obviously haven't been, and this petition was just dismissed in an appalling offhand manner. Okay, and Councillor Rowley, I'll let you respond to the point that was made.
So just in response to Councillor Looker's question, I think you're right. The carrot and the stick approach are two options. The stick approach, like you say, potentially could be a res parking scheme. I think there are a number of reasons why there's a resistance to residence parking scheme currently in our ward, and particularly in Tranby Avenue. And the types of property that you have in Tranby Avenue are types of property where the council tax is representative of the size of property. We all pay council tax, and yes, we're going to get a reduction in our council tax, but ultimately we pay an awful lot of money in our council tax to then be expected on top of our council tax to then pay for our family, friends, essential visitors to come and see us. I think that's the bit that actually our residents are more aggrieved to than the introduction of a residence parking scheme itself. So that would be the situation on the residence parking scheme. As far as the issues at the university are concerned, again, I echo Councillor Waters' comments that the reason people are parking there in Tranby Avenue is because it's free. And prior to that, they would park in Badger Hill. It was free, and cause the same frustrations to Badger Hill residents, who probably, in fairness to them, and again, in fairness to their councillors, they've suffered it for an awful lot longer than we've suffered it in Tranby. But to dismiss it or to introduce some form of traffic management that's not required, whether that be WLIs or a resident parking scheme, all that will do will move the problem. What we're asking for in the petition is for every opportunity, every potential resolution to be looked at, and we don't believe it has in the officer's report. I think you're right, Chair, we can't force the university to reduce their car parking fees. However, a conversation can be had and negotiations and discussions can be had that will see some form of resolution, whether it be use of the park and ride scheme and a shuttle bus, whether it be the electric e-scooters, whether it be a reduction for those parking fees for students and staff. That for us, there needs to be a discussion and a dialogue that is recorded, so that ultimately a decision that's made is made having looked at every single opportunity, every single potential, and leave no stone unturned. And if ultimately that comes back and the decision is the same, then at least, you know, as representatives in Oswaldwick and as representatives for those residents in Tranby Avenue, we can look them directly in the eye and said, we did everything we could. But at the moment, I don't think we have.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Fenton, unless that was a supplementary. No, in which case, Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to Res Park, I take Councillor Rowley's point in terms of the feedback you're getting from residents is that they're not supportive at this point in time of going down the Res Park route. I read in the report that in July 2020, that was when the consultation took place with Badger Hill residents, which led presumably to a formal ballot, which then led to the scheme being implemented. Was there any thought at that time of including parts of Oswaldwick in that process, if nothing else than to sort of confirm the anecdotal evidence of there being a lack of support for Res Park? So,
and again, Councillor Waters, I'm sure will also answer. So when that residents parking scheme was discussed with the residents, as ward councillors in the neighbouring ward, we were not consulted. Now, you could turn around and say, oh, actually, you should have had your nose to the ground and you should have realised what was happening and you should have asked to be consulted. And I accept that accusation, but how many of us know to the absolute, you know, minutiae of what's happening in our neighbouring wards? We're all very busy councillors in our own wards, looking after the residents that elected us, for us to be that actively involved in what's happening in other wards. So had we been involved, had we been consulted, then maybe we could have been involved in extending that ballot to residents in Tranby Avenue. What we have done since, and what I have done since, and my foot count register on my phone and my watch will tell you that I've knocked on all the doors in the affected area and spoken to residents. So I can, you know, it's not a formal poll, and by all means, if you wanted to instigate some form of formal poll, do so. But I can assure you that the majority of residents don't. But I hope that answers your question, Councillor Waters.
Well, I just ask you to turn to page 20. This decision that was made the other month and what you're dealing with today, wards affected, Hull Road, Oswaldwick and Derwent. When the extension to the Badger Hill residents parking scheme was undertaken, wards affected. The Badger Hill community residents group have reached out again. They've been in quite extent with me, and they fully agree, or the people that I've spoken to fully agree, that a solution should have been sought then. They just want rid of it. But they're quite supportive of what we're trying to do, which is get a proper solution, not just chase the problem up and down the highways and threaten people with residence parking charges, which will come in 2024 when the university's obligation to pay for all this nonsense ceases. We need a solution to this.
Okay, Councillor Cobain, and I think I'll make that the last question. I've just got a couple from the chair as well.
Thank Okay, just to be honest, I mean, because, you know, displaced parking is an issue in, you know, something that we deal with all the time. And our residents are generally, when badly affected by it, happy to go res park because they know it costs £1.25 a day for a visitor permit, and they think that's a price worth paying to keep the streets clear. And I don't know if your residents are aware that visitor permits are only £1.25 a day. And the other question is, in terms of going back to the actual call-in, we are saying that the reality is that the executive has decided to do nothing. I mean, it's funny that the Badger Hill residents group have reached out to you because, of course, there's well-known Lib Dem activists in that group who are using this issue to try and stir up an election campaign, whereas actually this whole issue has been caused by the fact that what the Lib Dem Green exec has decided to do, exactly what you're complaining about, which is consult and educate and not do anything more concrete to try and address the problem. Would you agree with that?
It's such a long question that I've got to sort of roll back on it a bit. But in terms of residents parking, it's not just simply a cost issue, although there's one resident in particular that actually moved to Osberwick from Uith, where they were chased down the streets with a residents parking scheme, and she knows exactly the implications of it for where she lives. There's also having a bit of pride in the area and a bit of pride in the streets, and they know what follows with residents parking schemes, another forest of poles that will take years to get rid of, as we now see in Badger Hill. But yeah, this should have been dealt with 10, 15 years ago without making this political. It's, to my mind, it's a degree of common sense that's exhibited, and it's a failing of local authorities that don't exhibit such common sense. We have people with closed mindsets somehow thinking that university travel plan to discourage cars driving up to the university actually works, and it doesn't. It's displaced this problem for the last 10 and 15 years. And we've now created a problem whereby you haven't got two compliant councillors who will sit back and let it happen. We're actually challenging this and requesting a solution.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane, I want to commend you. It's very rare that I see my colleagues speechless, and you rendered him for a moment speechless there. So well done on that one. But in fairness, in answer to your question, £1.50 a day doesn't seem like sort of £1.25, forgive me, £1.5 doesn't sound like an awful lot of money. But if you look at the number of people that live in this street, that have people that come and visit them, again, these are family homes. So, you know, there are family that visit, there are other people that visit. And you know, if you had three or four visitors a week, then you could easily be looking at kind of £5 a week. £5 a week, you divide that by 52. You know, there's a cost when we're already paying, you know, large sums of money for council tax. So however small the individual cost might be, as it adds up, I can understand that. So that's the situation with regards to the cost of the residence parking scheme. Personally, and this is my personal view, if the residence parking scheme was free as part of our council tax that we pay, I did ask that question to the residents, and probably the overwhelming number of residents in Tranby Avenue, actually, if it was free, would be more sympathetic to a residence parking scheme. But I understand that isn't the case at the moment. And as far as what we're asking the executive member to do, I absolutely respect the officers and the work that they do, and I commend them for the work that they do. Absolutely respect the work that the executive member for transport does, and I commend him for an awful lot of what he does. What I'm saying on this occasion, I believe there is more that could and should have been done before the executive member for transport made his decision. And myself and Councillor Waters were at that decision session, and we were able to petition him. And you know, he almost said, and forgive me, I don't want to kind of quote him if I'm not being correct, but he almost said, "There's not a lot we can do. There's not an awful lot we can do." but we're challenging that because we think there are other options that could be explored before we come to the situation where there is nothing we can do with this petition. And we're just simply asking you as a committee to instruct the executive member for transport and the officers to look at wider options before they come to this decision.
Thank you. I think, in a way, you've sort of summarised your position very neatly there, just at the end. So I won't go too far into the points that I wanted to make, other than just a couple of almost sort of technical points for you in terms of where you might be interested. Because you mentioned right at the top some safety issues around people coming out of their drives, and my sort of initial thought there was that actually if there is a safety issue, then it doesn't matter whether the double yellow lines pushes cars away or not. That's what they're designed to do. It's to protect the driveways. So I just wanted to kind of understand whether, because either there is a safety issue and therefore you need the double yellow lines, or there isn't a safety issue and the double yellow lines are not needed. I guess that the answer might be, well, if the cars weren't there, but the cars are there. So it's about trying to sort of address the problem that's in front of us, not necessarily what we want to do.
If I can just come in on that one, Chair. Yeah. So Councillor Waters and I agree on an awful lot. But one of the areas that we probably don't agree, and we mutually know this, is on the use of double yellow lines. So for areas where double yellow lines are there for safety reasons, then I'm more than happy to have those put in and have to see those put in place. There are certain areas along Tranby Avenue that actually should be double yellowed, but that aren't. There's not on page 25, you have a map. You've got Cavendish Grove, Tranby Avenue, which is the proposed area for the double yellow lines. But actually the reality is if you look further down Tranby Avenue to the top of the page, there's a really dangerous bend there that's not double yellowed at the moment. Actually, that's where double yellow lines need to be, because there's a real safety aspect there. So I think another thing, and again, where Councillor Waters and I slightly disagree, is the use of road markings and signage. We all know that it's illegal to park in front of a drop curb. Now, most of us know that, but actually does, and forgive me, I don't want to kind of be ageist but does a 22-year-old who's just passed his test and brings his car to the university, does he know that? Maybe not. So the use of the white H markings in front of the drives might be a way of controlling it. There's lots of things that can be done. I'm not against double yellow lines. I'm not against road markings and signage. My colleague is, and I respect that. But there are certain places there along Tranby Avenue, and I can take officers there and I can introduce them to residents there that have these issues day in, day out as a result of parking.
Thank you. And then the other sort of point I wanted to, or not point, question, just to sort of explore a little bit with you. So I hear what you're saying about, if Res Park could be free or that sort of thing. And I guess that, there's a bit of me that sort of thinks, well, you could always raise council tax and then that would share the burden and we could, because we have the same problem in Micklegate where, Res Park spreads, it just pushes the problems out and out and out. So, there are potential solutions to funding that in a different way, but it does need funding to be enforceable. That's a bottom line, I guess. But that part aside, the visitor issue around Res Park, there is nothing to say that you couldn't have a Res Park zone that had free parking for 120 minutes or a Res Park zone that was enforced between certain hours. So where I live, for example, it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Now that creates its own problems on a weekend, and there's people who want to make it 24/7, but we can do bespoke Res Park zone. So has that conversation been had with residents at all? And is that something that could be a potential solution?
I certainly wouldn't be trying to encourage anybody to support resident parking schemes, because unless you do the whole of Osberwick, down Osberwick Lane, Tanghall Lane, you will achieve nothing. All that will happen is student-related or university-related cars will be dumped along the bus routes. As I've said, it's so easy. Dump your car, up on the bus, you're at the university. Let's deal with the problem at source. Get the parking up at the university. That's where they're heading to. There's no need for any of all this even discussions about residence parking schemes. It's job creation by these people. Create a problem, upset people, and then offer them the carrot of a solution, which in effect is a big stick that'll cost them money. There's no need for it.
Okay, so I think what I'll do there is wrap up this section. I think it just, tell me if I'm correct, you essentially the bottom line of what you're calling us about is that you're saying that you don't feel that the petition has been sufficiently addressed. You'd like to see a more in-depth review of the options that are available, and then whatever might lead from that would feel like a more reasonable solution to the problem, rather than feeling at the minute as though the problem hasn't really been addressed. Is that a fair summary?
I think you're right, Chair, but if I might just suggest, as an offer, like every other councillor, we're very busy with our day jobs, those that have them, and other commitments. But I am willing to work with officers to look at a way of looking at a root and branch review of this, rather than just letting the officers go away and do it. I'm more than happy to work with officers. And if that means visiting residents on Tranby Avenue to gauge their opinions and to gauge their things, I'm more than happy to be involved in that. I know both Councillor Waters and I have jobs that are very demanding, but I'm certainly prepared to do that. I want to work with officers. I don't want to just let them go off and do it and then come back and we're in the same position. So that's an offer that I'm prepared to put out.
Just one last point. I know Tranby Avenue has been mentioned a lot. This isn't just about Tranby Avenue. It's about the side streets off. It's about the little section of Hull Road that leads down to Nursery Gardens. The displaced parking, as I say, I would have said 30 odd cars. It's causing chaos in quite a wide area rather than just Tranby Avenue.
Okay, thank you both. That's noted. So I will now invite Councillor de Gorne as the exec member for transport to come and just set out his reasoning behind his decision making. I'm just going to note the time as well. I'm going to note that section took us about 20, 30, 40 minutes. So if we could crack on, that'd be great.
Right, thank you. First off, I would preface, just to answer that last point, I'm certainly, as evidenced by my working with the whole road wall councillors, any councillors that have got issues such as this that they want to work with me on, I'm more than happy to do that and work with officers to try and achieve a satisfactory outcome. And I would also just reference, I'm sure the whole road wall councillors are very much involved with the University Good Neighbours group. I'm sure that the university will be willing to extend an invite to any councillors that are impacted by the impact of their staff or students would be more than welcome to attend that. I have attended some myself as Fishergate ward councillor in terms of items that might, or in terms of relation to my responsibility. So I just wanted to preface my comments with those particular points. So firstly, I want to put on record my thanks to officers for the work that went into securing the extension for the R39 residence parking zone, which was, as been explained in the report, in accordance with planning consent for Heslington East, which the planning inquiry acknowledged could lead to significant increases in traffic on our network if it wasn't properly managed, with sustainable travel alternatives such as are referred to in paragraph 22 and the condition mentioned in paragraph 5. Walking, cycling and public transport options are promoted by the university, ranging from cycle parking, a free bus service between campuses, permit parking and so on. However, the conditions, I mean, it's a bit of a conversation earlier on just now about sticks and carrots. The conditions in the planning consent set out the stick mechanism to deal with unacceptable displacement parking into surrounding residential areas, requiring the university to fund parking measures such as the residence parking restrictions which have been implemented in response to the annual survey that they do in identifying increased parking in the surrounding streets in Badger Hill area. So this decision was clearly to address the residents' concerns about the parking situation which had been raised through their ward councillors. I do find it somewhat ironic that this call-in is response to the council actually implementing the policy in response to those appeals from residents to address the problem that they were experiencing, and a policy solution which apparently is rejected by at least one of the call-in members to tackle the displacement that's now being experienced. The survey that university parking of university parking, which has been referred to in the report, did clearly make a response to the assertion about empty university car parks, and I accept the points that are raised about there being different levels of occupancy on different days. The university will probably be able to give more accurate information about the sort of levels and how that varies from time of year and for specific events. I would hope that officers would be very much willing to work with the university on their travel plan and looking at how we can reduce the incidence of car, particularly single occupancy car use to and from the university. I would sort of also point out that simply building more car parks would increase congestion on the surrounding roads to and through Heslington, which is far from the solution we want as an authority. So this calling process is unfortunately taking up officer time, which could be spent rolling out the residents' parking that residents in my ward certainly are eagerly awaiting in response to more purpose-built student accommodation close to where they live. However, it does highlight the need for us to do more to reduce car dependency and develop an effective zero carbon transport strategy for the city. And if there are any specific points, I'm happy to answer questions on those.
Thank you, Councillor de Goan. I'm not sure that a couple of hours this afternoon could have otherwise been spent on finding a solution to the problem, but you know, we do have officers who are very capable, so maybe they could have done in that time. I've got Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor de Goan, you know that I live in a street where there is a res park zone, and you also know that I'm very much in favour of res park. That zone was there before I moved into the streets in 1995, and without it I would never be able to park in my street because commuters or tourists would be parked in my street. However, we also know from our ward of Fishergate that whenever we've created a new res park zone, there has been a knock-on effect. There is a problem in those liminal areas surrounding a new res park zone. And that's why it's been so important to construct the geography of a new res parking zone. Now, I don't know enough about Oswaldwick to say whether Councillor Walters is right and say, well, if you extended one area, assuming those residents in that area were in favour, whether you would have to have the whole of Oswaldwick. I simply don't know enough about the topography of Oswaldwick. However, in responding to this petition, I just wonder whether there is anything more that you can do to help the residents of those areas. And I've got 4 points that I've scribbled down. The first one is about the badly parked vehicles and the enforcement of that. And I hope you would encourage, and the officers are here, so they'll pick it up as well, that there should be some increased enforcement of badly parked vehicles in those areas to address some of the problems that Councillor Rowley in particular mentioned. Secondly, one of the suggestions was about a shuttle bus. And clearly that's not something that the council is going to fund, but I wonder whether you have had any discussion with the university about that, or whether you could have a discussion with the university about shuttle bus from Park and Ride. Thirdly, I wouldn't agree with the petitioners that you've just refused to do anything. You have resolved to engage with the school travel team at Archbishop Holgate School and the University of York. I wonder whether you have also considered engagement with the Students' Union to again make the point to students that they shouldn't bring a car to York, and if they do bring a car to York, they shouldn't annoy residents of the surrounding areas with their parking. And the fourth point is about yellow lines that Councillor Rowley, although not Councillor Walters, seem to believe that there's some benefits in having some yellow lines in those areas. And I wonder whether you would discuss that further with Councillor Rowley and the officers and see whether anything could be taken forward in terms of yellow lines and maybe H bars.
Right, thank you. Well, certainly, I mean, firstly, enforcement of bad parking. I mean, unfortunately, it's never one of those areas where, you know, as Councillor Waters said, you would hope that common sense applies, but unfortunately, all too often, people who are in a hurry to get to work or to study or whatever, just see an opportunity and take a chance on parking somewhere, which is without even thinking about how it's going to impact on the residents on those streets. So, you know, that's the case that applies across the city. We need a little bit more consideration all around, I think, from people. But if it's bad parking and there are no restrictions, then unfortunately it does tend to be a police matter. You know, if it's actually an obstruction of the footpath or somebody's driveway, then that is something that the police need to enforce rather than our
There are
civil
elements
enforcement.
which are council's responsibility and others which come under the police, as
Yeah.
you know.
So obviously that's another sort of element which we have to take into account. And I think your point about W lines, certainly that is something that I know from the last 3 years, we are generally speaking reluctant to apply W lines unless there's a clear need on safety grounds. And that was certainly a position which I would support, which is why inevitably we get this sort of knock-on effect when residence parking is introduced, then there's a new problem somewhere else where we haven't considered that in terms of traffic restrictions. We only apply them because there is clearly a need for them. So whether it's sort of, I know next week we've got on my agenda, there's the stadium area around the stadium, impact on that in residents, and also this particular issue on Tranby Avenue, I think is down for decision, you know, on how that's taken forward next week. So certainly happy to work with local ward councillors and officers about traffic restrictions where that is appropriate. I think the other thing which a lot of residents don't quite understand is that we can, when we've advertised and gone through the legal process, we can reduce the extent of a limit. But if there's a knock-on effect and we haven't advertised it, then that's another step in the process. So inevitably the decisions do get quite lengthy and drawn out to go through the due legal process.
I certainly appreciate that.
On the other points that you made, certainly, you know, regardless of what's the decision of the committee today, I'm more than happy to talk to the university and to officers about what options there might be for additional measures to give the travel plan that the university has more impact. And, you know, obviously that is the best win-win solution, is that the sustainable travel options are more attractive and there's less need then for enforcement or residence parking or whatever, if more of the people who are currently parking choose to use another form of transport to get to university. Just so likewise, conversations with the Students' Union would seem to make sense. And as you said, I'm aware that over the years, the university has made increasing efforts to help potential new students understand that it's not really appropriate in the first year at university, unless they have a specific need for travel for a placement or something like that, to bring a car to York, and a lot of the accommodation is designed around that assumption. But we do need to get that message over to potential students, you know, even before they come to university.
Yeah, I think what I was meaning is the administration of both universities is fairly stable, but the Students' Union frankly changes every year. And to continue to engage with the Students' Union on an annual basis is really quite important in getting that message across.
And just to also just to sort of complete the points you made, as is referred to in the report, we have undertaken to talk to Archbishop Holgate School. The only sort of caveat I would put is that the problem around schools, as should be, I'm sure any of the councillors sat around this table will be aware that there are difficulties about safety, and we're trying to discourage driving and parking close to school entrances. The team that we have that deliver that support is very limited in terms of their staffing availability. So, that is something that I am aware of and concerned that whatever opportunity we get to boost that, and because having a member of staff working with the Parent Teachers Association or schools and so on can potentially be far more effective than lots of regulations if we can achieve that mode shift with more people walking and cycling where that is an option for them.
Councillor Kilbane, you were next. Councillor Hook, did I see you indicating as well? Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair. I'll keep my question brief. One of the main contentions of the councillors was that any university parking should be accommodated on the university site. You said that more car parks would increase congestion. Can you expand on why more car parks will increase congestion? Well, if there's more capacity and more cars use a road, there's only one road to and from the university. It's called Field Lane. Obviously, actually, living at the other end of that, I went to the shops I think it might have been Friday at 4 o'clock. And the line of traffic that's leaving the university campus or the schools or whatever at that time was far more noticeable than at other times of the day or week. Just so, are you saying it's preferable for the parking to be dispersed throughout, so across Osbaldwick and Fulford and other places? No, I'm saying it's preferable to have a travel plan that's effective. That means that people walk, cycle, car share, travel by public transport than drive. And unless you support introduction of congestion charge, there's no other mechanism we have to limit the level of car traffic than constraining parking and providing incentives for the alternatives.
Just to expand on that, and I will come to you in a moment, Councillor Hook, but the essence of what you're saying then is that presumably you feel that the university's travel plan is not currently effective because it's having this detrimental impact on
the evidence is before us.
So what do you feel that because the solution that you're proposing is that the school travel team will engage with the university?
No, sorry, that was with Archbishop Holgate School. I think.
Sorry, I'm looking. Yeah, no, but I think it says the university as well. I'm just looking at what the decision was. It says the approved. Your decision was that you approved the increased engagement of the school travel team with the Archbishop Holgate School and the University of York.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering what stick, because we've been talking about carrots and sticks. What stick does the school travel team have to get the University of York to improve their travel plan, which we feel is ineffective?
Well, I suppose at the current moment in time, the Badger Hill R39 residence parking zone, under the conditions of the planning consent, there was a condition that required any additional mitigation measures as a result of failure to meet their travel plan to be funded by the university. So that extension, anyone who lives within that area needs a permit, and that is funded until 2024 by the university. So obviously each time it's extended, that is a stick, if you like, against the university. I mean, one of the reasons why there was quite a lengthy period from the ward councillors raising the issue until it was implemented was because of the need to go through the Section 106 process with the university to enable, to ensure that they were actually funding that extension of the residence parking.
So would
zone.
your anticipation be then that the outcome of your decision would be that a similar process might begin with the Osbaldwick area and the Osbaldwick residents? Because I think if we're saying that the travel plan doesn't work, and the solution that we had for Badger Hill was to go down that route, are you suggesting that the same sort of solution might happen for Osbaldwick? Or if not, what do you anticipate the school travel team being able to do to address it?
Well, I think the main point was to explore ideas such as those that were raised by the petitioners, that if there are alternatives which could make it more attractive not to seek to drive or park in residential streets, such as a shuttle bus, that should be explored with the university. Obviously, they already subsidise the bus between the two campuses for staff and students. That could be an option to discuss with the university. Obviously, I don't know what the outcome would be, but that could be something that we could explore. And so that was obviously part of the response, was to look at those sorts of options, as well as any issues arising from Archbishop Aldgate School.
And so that was my question initially, was do you anticipate that the school travel team have actually got the tools, got the teeth to be able to do that?
I know they've got the expertise. Whether they've got the resource is another question, because of all the commitments they've already trying to address elsewhere in the city.
Okay, thank you. I wonder whether when we come to speak to officers, they might be able to elaborate on that a little bit further as well. Councillor Hook.
Yes, I'm aware that. Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry. Not used to this. Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that Google's not brilliant, but I've just been having a look, and it's 27 minutes to walk from Grimston Bar Park and Ride to the university, or at least some point on the university, and 22 minutes from Tranby Avenue. And I think one of the things, you wouldn't even need the shuttle bus if it was possible to park overnight in the Grimston Bar, because I'm aware that the councillors were saying that some cars were there permanently for several days without moving, so they would need an overnight parking thing. And I thought that park and rides were going to start to open, be available for people to walk and park and stay overnight. Is that coming in?
I think that's part of a development. We haven't got the full details of what's proposed yet. I think you're referring to something within the bus service improvement plan to develop more hubs. I think the reservation I had with your comment is the reason we don't have overnight parking is obviously we don't want to provide free parking for someone to leave a car there for weeks. The whole idea of park and ride is it's someone who parks and rides.
But it's also cheaper for people in hotels.
So the solution is more, as you said, that if people want to park and ride to the university rather than into town, in fact, into the city centre, whether that might be an option that could become available. And as I said previously, recognise that some students do need to have cars as part of, depending on what course they're studying on. They may need to go on placements and they need that to access those placements as part of their course. But that doesn't mean that they then need to drive in when they're spending time on campus. They don't necessarily need to drive in. The point you make about the extent of the area, the further away the zone stretches from campus, obviously the less attractive it is for anybody to park 5 minutes away and walk the last short distance. If you're getting to that point, I would have thought that the displacement effect would be relatively minor. The issue about parking and people parking and using the bus could certainly be looked at in terms of whether there's any connections that could be made to some of the other park and ride sites to provide a park and ride to the university rather than to a city centre. But those are all options that, obviously could be explored.
Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Just kind of picking up on that point, because certainly from reading the output from the decision session where it talked about the school travel team liaising with Archbishop Holgate and the university, perhaps not surprised that the calling councillors had concerns about the scope of that work, and I take on board what you say about capacity to explore further options such as liaising with FIRST, which I guess the university may lead on, but that's so it'd be helpful to understand, to get clarification of your understanding as to what that resolution could potentially encompass, because the petitioners are clearly seeking a solution, but that solution isn't specified. So is the work that you committed to in your decision, does that have the potential to identify potential solutions that address some of the issues, legitimate issues that led to the petition in the first place?
Well, yeah, as you point out, the recommendations which were agreed was that engagement from the council. I mean, whether it's a school travel team or other officers, the point is that the council officers could engage with both parties, and the travel plan is the key to the solution, rather, or the sort of the stick, as you say, with the residents parking and double yellow lines in appropriate locations. Those are the two options, really, as I see it. There was a suggestion about a section 73 to vary the planning consent. That seems to me to be something which wouldn't be in accordance with our local transport plan policy of seeking to reduce car traffic and to promote sustainable travel. And it also, as I said earlier, would go counter to our aspirations to reduce congestion as much as possible rather than increase it.
I'm just going to jump in and just sort of, we might just need to have a little dialogue here, because a lot of what you're saying there sounds quite a lot like a concession. And what you seem to be saying is that whilst the decision that was taken was specific about it being the school travel team that would be negotiating with, or would be engaging with, the university and archbishops, what you seem to be going on to say is that you're more than happy for whichever the appropriate officers are to engage with the university and others around possible solutions that could be reached, which I think is probably the nub of, if we just put the section 73 thing to one side just for a second, because I think that's probably a standalone, maybe slightly more contentious issue. But essentially what the call-in members seem to be asking for was a wider engagement with an appropriate level of officers and the university to be able to try to meaningfully reach a solution, and didn't necessarily feel that the school travel team was the most appropriate people to be doing that. And what I think you've just said is that you maybe agree with that.
Well, I'm happy to allow the officers to answer in terms of what staff resource is available. I'm just giving if you like, a political indication that I am supportive of any efforts to enhance the university travel plan and its effectiveness, because that would that potentially would remove the problem without the stick approach of residents parking or the WL lines. And it may be that, depending on the decision next week, that there will be some WL lines are seen as being necessary, at least in the short term. But work with the university, if that is, as has been suggested, the main source of the displacement parking, then that's obviously the issue that we want to try and address. But I don't think but I suppose what I'm saying is we don't need to refer it back to do that. I'm willing to undertake to do that. Look at that aspect. Does that help?
I think the voices on both sides of me suggest that would be what we would consider a concession in this process.
As I say, I'm happy to offer that as if you like, as a concession. But my understanding really was maybe it wasn't as sufficiently clear in the decision, but that's what we were intending to do in any case. I don't really see a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is, as you say, is suggesting that we're just moving the problem without being conscious of the other aspects that need to be followed through for promoting mode shift and sustainable travel.
Okay. So I think the one other thing that I would just want to sort of ask you about then in that context, and as I say, I think there still is this separate issue around the section 73 and whether or not the Colin members would feel that was exploring enough of the range of options that they see. But I think that definitely sounds to me like that there's some scope for some positive in what you're saying there. I guess that the other part of that would then be how you might envisage any of that sort of exploration of options, that exploration of how you might adapt the travel plan and other things, how that might then be reported back, both to the ward councillors, to residents, potentially through the scrutiny function. And again, I appreciate I'm slightly putting you on the spot here, but in your mind, do you see this as an ongoing thing, that there may be opportunities to input further or bring back a sense of actually this is working, this isn't working?
I think well, fundamentally, I think it is something as a city we need to address, and we need to get the university on board with whatever measures are needed, not least because I'm aware, as I was aware with this the original decision, aware of the time frame that the planning consent only had a 15-year time horizon for the university to subsidise the residents' parking. So, 2024, as I understand it, at that point in time, all those areas around Badger Hill, Heslington, that have up to now been funded through that, then the residents quite reasonably will expect some form of consultation about whether they're going to start picking up the tab or whether they want to opt out and allow people to start parking on their streets again. And obviously, from a transport strategy, that would be a backward step for us. It would probably be a backward step for people living in and around the university. But there is a democratic expectation, I would say, that there is that sort of process, and the university would need some clear commitments that they have a strategy to prevent that displacement parking reappearing.
Okay, I think what I'll do for now then is we'll wrap up this section. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Are you able to stay around for the remainder of the call-in? Because it might be a case that just at the very end we just ask you to come back if there's anything that we just want to clarify in terms of concessions and otherwise. But thank you very much for your time so far. And what I'll do is invite James and Dave. I hope that you've been sort of scribbling down notes of the various points that we've asked you to just pick up on, and anything that has come up, if you can just sort of go through and just address those in your opening remarks. And then obviously if people are wanting to ask any further questions, I'm sure they will.
Okay, so I'll open up and then I might pass to Dave or use Dave during the questions. So the powers we have as a highway authority are generally either through rules that apply to everyone or rules that apply differently for residents as opposed to other motorists. So when I referenced in the meeting that our powers were limited, that's what I was referencing. So to put that into context, as a highway authority, we have two options: parking restrictions, such as double yellow lines, or timed restrictions, as I think were mentioned earlier, or a residence parking scheme that treats residents differently. In terms of the University Planning Permission, the condition that were applied, the travel plan, is all to discourage driving to the university. That's the context of the planning decisions made around the university. And as a result of that, the university investing significant sums in bus services and also funding the Res Park scheme in Badger Hill, as you've heard. The Section 106 agreement, which funds the parking scheme in Badger Hill, the residence parking scheme in Badger Hill, could also fund a residence parking scheme in Osbaldwick. It would depend upon the figures from the annual survey that's done as part of the Section 106 to determine if the parking impact was sufficient. Under the council's process, if that trigger had been met, we would then engage with residents and consult them about a parking scheme in the same way we did for Badger Hill. So just because it's been met doesn't mean we would necessarily move straight to it. You've heard talk about a Section 73 under planning, and that generally is where an applicant applies to pursue development in contravention of a condition that a planning committee have imposed. So there's a restrictive covenant on the university about parking. They could apply for a Section 73 to remove that restrictive covenant. More than nine times out of 10, but that would be an applicant-led process because you're trying to develop something that against what the planning authority has asked you to do. Technically, the council could do it, but then we've got no power to force the university to do anything if we did remove that restrictive covenant, if that makes sense. The travel plan for the university is reviewed on a 5-yearly basis, and its next review is imminent. And obviously members would be involved in that, particularly if there was a significant policy shift, which does anything that might encourage car travel. I think based on the discussions today, we could engage with the Students' Union on that travel plan review. I think that would be a positive step forward. And I think just to say, we wouldn't limit the engagement to the school travel team. They would be the team that lead on that engagement, but we don't work in such strict silos that they just do it in isolation. You know, we would discuss it in our team meetings and that they would then lead on it. Just about some of the other suggestions that have been made. The bus service UB1, which is a dedicated free of charge campus shuttles between Halifax College, the campus and Grimston Bar Park and Ride at the moment. The recent funding announcement of bus service improvement plan, part of that funding at the moment, and we're still in negotiation with Department for Transport, is to turn the park and ride sites into multimodal travel points, which also includes overnight parking, to pick up your point, Councillor Hook. There are currently Tier scooters at the university. Part of the deployment of Tier scooters was at the university. That was a site we deployed to right at the very beginning of the process, actually. As you've heard, there's a report going to May Exec considering double yellow lines on Tranby Avenue to the May the 17th decision session. Our civil enforcements have been patrolling this location, but any badly parked vehicles can be reported to the parking hotline, and there's a telephone number which I'll make sure we include in the minutes that can be reported, and then civil enforcement officers will attend. So I think I've picked up most of the comments that have been made.
Dave, did you want to add anything further? Or?
I was just going to add on the last point that because there are no restrictions actually on Tranby Avenue, the civil enforcement officers were responding to issues raised by residents about obstructions that we can enforce on. So we wouldn't routinely patrol that area, but it was patrolled in response to some of the residents' concerns that were raised.
Thank you. There was just a couple of bits that I just wanted to clarify, just in your responses there initially. The car park occupancy times when that was done and how those figures were achieved at? I don't know whether you had any information on that, because I think part of the concern was that the occupancy was perhaps not as reliable as people might anecdotally see it to be.
It was a specific date that the surveys were taken, 11th of November. My understanding that it wasn't an open day or a graduation day, but I don't know that for fact.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question that I just wanted to ask is probably one for James, I guess. You slightly touched on it in terms of the school travel team leading, but I think that some of what I was just trying to get at with Councillor de Gorn was perhaps a need for a little bit more engagement from perhaps a range of different officers and the university and others. And I wondered whether or not, you know, I appreciate, again, I'm slightly putting you on the spot now, but in terms of the resource, the capacity that you have, is that something that you think could be feasible to have that slightly differentiated level of engagement?
I don't think it would be, the school travel team would lead on it. They would open negotiations, but they wouldn't be doing it in isolation. So they'd be talking to our iTravel team, they'd be talking to some of our travel planners. So it would be across the piece. That is the extra work we're doing. The business as usual is the review that would come up, and that would be the review of the travel plan, sorry. That is, again, business as usual that we would do. Obviously, if that became a more significant piece of work, we would need to review resourcing. You know, if we were starting from scratch and saying, actually, how do we allow students to drive to the university rather than try and discourage it, that would be a major piece of work and a major piece of undertaking that we'd probably need resources for. But providing the principles we are looking at remain the same, then yes, we can resource that, and we would do that within our teams. But yeah, just because the school travel team lead on it doesn't mean that it wouldn't include other officers. That's not, we don't work in silos like that, as I say.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful clarification. And just one final point before I bring you in, Councillor Taylor, I have seen you indicating. With the school travel team and that engagement process, what would you envisage being the mechanism by which, well, both the exec member, the ward councillors, residents might be able to also kind of feed into that process or understand what the outcomes of that process has been? Because I think that my hunch would be that the worry for the signatories of the petition and the ward councillors representing them is that this is the end of the process. And what I think you're both trying to say to us is that no, this is an ongoing discussion and this is something that we will keep talking about. But I guess the councillors and the residents will need to know, well, where does that come back? How does that come back? What do we do if we're not satisfied with the outcome of that? Or how do we praise you for solving the problem?
I assume the next version of the travel plan would come to a decision session. Obviously, that could go to a scrutiny either before or afterwards as part of that. It could be a topic of scrutiny chooses to pick up in the process. So I think that, you know, as a minimum, there will be an executive member decision session about it, which is obviously in public with a level of public scrutiny. Members may wish to scrutinise that separately. If there was a significant policy change, that is probably an executive decision rather than an exec member decision, but I'll be bowing to the people either side of you to make that decision. Give me that guidance.
Thank you. Thanks for those points of clarification there. So Councillor Taylor, and I'll invite questions from any other members as well at this point.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, James. I thought what you had to say was very positive. And I would also support the Chair's suggestion that I think there needs to be some high level discussion with the university about this, that there are problems which are not actually working at the moment. My question was about the funding, the Section 106 funding supplied by the university. I think you mentioned it funds or it subsidises a bus, UB1 bus, was it? And it subsidised the introduction of some residence parking. Does all of that end in 2024? So if the residents of Osborne were to have a change of hearts with some further information about ResPark, and a residence parking zone was brought in that area, would the funding for that expire by 2024?
The honest answer is, I don't know. I'd need to double check the exact wording of that section 106. I could come back to you on it, but I can't be 100% certain off the top of my head about when the expiry date is or how the review of the travel plan impacts upon the section 106. I'd need to go back and double check that into relation.
And if the section 106 money did end at that time, or would there be any other way of funding that, either the subsidised buses or the introduction of a ResPac zone, even if that was you know, a staggered phase out of ResPac?
I mean, I suppose technically that would be a decision for members if they wanted to fund that. That would be a decision for members. I think, yeah, as I say, I think it links to the question before that I need to double check the section 106 and the travel plan wording exactly to make sure what happens at review points and at 2024. Obviously, whether the council wish to continue those as free would be a decision for members. I don't know the email, David.
I think it's probably also worth saying that when we've got the BSIP money come through and we've got the investment in the proposals around park and rides as multimodal hubs, it'll naturally give more options at that point from the park and ride that we don't currently have now. So it's different things that we could consider then that obviously in terms of policy and uses of the park and ride aren't currently in play now.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from around the table? One from Councillor Baker.
Thanks. Is there any signs that the new digitisation system of the ResPark might one day bring, obviously one of the aims for any of these kind of rationalising, digitising systems is to bring costs down. So, and obviously we would hope that you can bring costs down for residents eventually. So with the new system, does it look like that might one day be possible, that ResPark permits could decrease in cost for residents?
I suppose there's a two-pronged answer to that. One of which is, at the moment, no, because it's causing us some issues, but as we work through those issues and we are getting through them, it should drive more efficiency. Obviously, the level is set by full council, not by officers. So to a certain extent, how you choose to balance the budget is a decision for members. So just because there is an efficiency in a service doesn't necessarily mean you automatically transfer it straight to it.
May I declare an interest at this point, because I pay a ResPac fee annually and I'd avoided asking that question for precisely that reason.
I think there's a number of us around this table that might equally need to, if we were to get onto that, but I think it's probably not the point of the call in. So I think I was sort of poised to jump in if it was going to be a long discussion on that particular topic. I think what I'm just trying to sort of resolve, because I'm not seeing any further questions for officers, so I think we sort of start to move into the. Oh, did you want to make one further point?
I did want to make the point actually to thank councillors for the offer of helping out on the when we revise the travel plan. So we'll take you up on that offer. So thank you for offering that.
Thank you. What I was just I was trying to half listen to the conversation that you two were both having, and also having a sort of a very quick conversation here in terms of how to handle the next part of this process, because ordinarily what we would do is we would go into some discussion and debate, and then we would look at a vote, and we do effectively have a sort of all or nothing situation with the voting options, which are either to say that there's nothing at all that we need to do, or that we need to make some recommendations and send it back to executive. And actually what's happened during the course of the discussion today is that there's, I think, been some concessions made around what the understanding of the engagement should be, how it should go ahead, and also how the process perhaps would continue beyond just that single decision session that was taken. Now, I think some of the stuff that Councillor Taylor was getting into there around the 106 and the travel plan being looked at again and all of that sort of stuff is absolutely sort of scrutiny fodder. That's the sort of stuff that economy in place should be looking at as a matter of course anyway. And I think, James, you were talking about potential decision points and therefore the opportunity for some pre-decision around some of that. I am very conscious of Councillor Rowley and Councillor Waters also kind of wanting to have a very pragmatic sort of approach to their residents. And one of the dangers is that we say, oh, well, we'll have this discussion and we'll think about that and we'll talk about this. And all the meanwhile, their residents are having to deal with, you know, issues on the street, you know, on a day-to-day basis. Though I think that we did have some useful conversation around double yellow lines where there's safety issues and some of that sort of stuff. So I suppose what I'm sort of drawing towards is wondering whether or not we feel that we've actually got sufficient coming together of conversation to be saying, actually, we've got the concessions here. It then becomes slightly immaterial as to whether we're upholding or otherwise a call-in, because the point of this meeting has been to clarify these points and to make it very clear that there needs to be a greater engagement than simply the school travel team. But I think that James has also acknowledged that that's what was implicitly understood by the officers, but perhaps not made explicit in the discussion. And I think, but I'm be corrected if I'm wrong, if we feel that that's the place we've reached to, we're actually in a position where we can record that as the outcome of the committee today and say that that's been a productive session and we're satisfied with that. I'd take views from around the table as to whether people feel that that's sufficiently covers it. I am conscious that it doesn't address the section 73 aspect of it, but that maybe is a thing to pick up. So I saw Councillor Kilbane. I saw a hand, sorry, on my right, Councillor Baker.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I think that might be useful because if we were to just judge this call-in on the grounds of the call-in itself, then I think the call-in itself would fall because actually, you know, the council has done something. It just hasn't done enough to satisfy the people that live in Hospital Wick and Derwent and the ward councillors. So I think what you're suggesting is something would give the council the opportunity to try and go and do more and to explore all of those options that have been laid out. But I think we would need to see that sort of concretely, you know, as to what is it that we're asking them to go and have a look at and go and explore, so that there is something for the residents there to at least try and pin their hopes upon.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Kilbane just said, and also wanted to point out something I've just seen on page 19, having looked at the equalities impact assessment. Just the description of what it says will have a positive impact on young people, disregard the fact that it's impacting young people possibly, but it says that the work that is going to happen is further work on travel planning, allowing a review of options. And if that sentence had been transposed into what the recommendation was going to more broadly entail and the reason for it, that's just another point of clarity to show that there is further work behind that the executive member agreed that, well, you know, accepted, would have approved that recommendation. And just adding that in would have been really helpful, because it specifically says that it allows a review of options, which is what the call-in members have asked for. So I think this session has been helpful in and of itself, and agree with the chair.
Councillor Taylor was next, and then Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Yes, I'm in agreement with Pete and yourself, Chair, and Rosie for that matter. I was never much in favour of this all or nothing, and I think we have reached some views around the table, and what's come back from the executive member and the officers that can take things forward. I think we should mention better enforcement or continued enforcement in that area. I think we should mention engagement with the Students' Union as well as the other bodies, and the restrictions which may be coming in the next week. I just also want to proselytise for Res Park, because I mean, nobody wants to pay more taxes, nobody wants to pay more for anything, but has to be said that the cost of Res Park compared to the cost of owning a car is minimal.
I'm absolutely very pleased to hear you say we don't want the all or nothing. We did have an option. I'm just saying. Councillor Fenton.
I think if there was an obvious solution along the lines called for by the petitioners that had been rejected, then I think it would have been a different discussion. But because what we've discussed through is a number of steps that may lead to a solution or a number of potential solutions, I think that is a sensible process that needs to be followed. I know as someone who has experience of working through similar issues in my ward in relation to your college, that can lead in a number of places. In our case, it led to a Res Park proposal that was rejected. So it is rightly led by residents who will have, often there won't be a consensus as to what the right thing is to do. But I think in terms of what we've discussed and in the absence of a silver bullet solution having been identified by either council officers or residents or ward councillors, it's been helpful to unpack and better understand the scope of the actions that were committed to at the decision session. So I think in that sense, we should be grateful to the calling members for having given us the opportunity to have had that discussion.
Okay, I think we've all sort of come to the same place. Well, my one hesitation is that I've got a sort of a long and jumbled list of all of the things that we're trying to kind of capture. I'm just wondering if it's worth not calling a sort of formal adjournment, but if I just have sort of a couple of minutes, if you don't mind just sitting, we'll just scribble a few notes together and then I'll put it to you. And then if there's anything that we feel that we've missed or that we've not got, we can perhaps add that. And then I'll invite Councillor de Gorne as the exec member just to come back to the table at that point, just to confirm that he's happy with what we're suggesting as a concession that we think we've all agreed, and then see where we are. And I know the point that Councillor Kilbane made about, we do just need to make sure it's something concrete, not something that's sort of a bit woolly and a bit, we need some concrete points within there. So if you don't mind just bearing with us for a minute or two, go on, Councillor Taylor.
Are we going to include a rejection of the suggestion that we renegotiate the travel plan of the university to provide more parking on its sites, though? I think that would go against what councillors believe for many years and what is written into our local transport plan. I'll let you consider that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that would, so I think we move into slightly different territory with that, because I think what we're trying to encapsulate is the concessions that Councillor de Gorne made. And if we sort of encapsulate that, if we were going to go down that route, we might end up being into the situation of wanting to be making recommendations, which then pushes us into voting, which then potentially changes the consensus that I feel that we may be reaching.
Yeah, I think we need
Councillor
the next
Kilbane.
steps. Yeah.
And it would lead us into arguments about multi-storey car parks and induced congestion and all that kind of stuff.
And
So
there is my point.
I'm happy to go down that route if you want, but
Let's just sit tight for a couple of minutes. Let me just talk this through and then I'll come back to you. Right, if everybody's all right, we are still live. We have been live. So to all those people who've been watching us all just nicely, happily chatting away, we're not technically coming out of an adjournment because we didn't technically go into an adjournment, but that's just taken us a minute or two longer than I thought it might do initially. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read you a proposal that I'm going to put to you. Just before I do, I'm going to just note that the issues around double yellows and what have you, I think are coming to an exec member decision session in June anyway. And there's an opportunity if the ward councillors want to make any points around safety issues or you know, the use or otherwise of double yellows, that can be managed through that exec member decision session.
It's May the 17th.
May the 17th. Thank you very much. So it's next week. Thank you. So the proposal is going to be, in light of concessions made by the executive member and the confirmation of feasibility of what is achievable by officers, members are agreed that the engagement with the university and school will not just be limited to the council school travel team, though will initially be led by them. That will bring a review of the university travel plan to a future session of the executive member for transport, and that will include engagement with the students' union as well as ward councillors. That there will be continued enforcement of parking in the area around Tranby Avenue and wherever else is required, wherever that's possible. That there will be some pre-decision scrutiny before anything goes back to executive, either on the 106 agreements or the travel plans with the university. And that we will look at a commission scrutiny slot to take into account these areas. That could be pre-decision or it could be just a sort of pre-decision, if you see what I mean, but a scrutiny sort of deeper dive into some of these issues. And it's feasible that that would take place within the next 6 months. And that the review that is imminently due of the university travel plan will follow with that sort of higher level negotiation with the university as we've suggested would be needed. We might just tighten the wording up a little bit more on that because we have slightly done it on the fly, but I think that that's covered all of the elements that we were discussing. Are members all happy that that is what we take from this meeting? Yeah. So I think I'm not going to read it all again, but formally, I'm formally proposing that. So can I just see a show of hands that people are in favour of that proposal? Okay. Thank you indeed. Okay, and so in light of that, we've really concluded the business of the meeting today. So there's no need for us to go any further than that. So I will just thank everybody for their input today. Thank officers and exec member for your attendance. And there's no urgent business. So those of you who are staying for the second call in at 5:30, I will see you all shortly. And those that aren't, I will see you again